Hey Chevy, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 93. The Daf begins with a continuation of the discussion from yesterday about can it possibly be that adding a wall actually makes things more stringent. And then we talk about three karpafs that are next to each other. Okay. Two chutzers that in between them lies a platform that is 5 tefachim and a wall that is 5 tefachim. And when people suddenly get added to your chutzer on Shabbos, and obviously they're not included in your Eruv, what happens? Chevra, let's begin so we could find out. We're going to start on Daf Tzadi Beis Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Amale Rava le'Abaye v'lomatzinu mechitza le'Isser. So Rava says to Abaye, we don't find that a wall, a partition that is constructed could be more machmir, because yesterday Abaye was surprised that Rabba and Reb Zera and Rabbi Bar Rav Chanan were alleging that if you basically add a wall to a chutzner, it makes the halachas of kalayim more machmir. So Rava is now coming to say, well, Abaye, I could bring you an example of a case where adding a wall makes things more stringent. V'ya itmar, because we learn by Amoraim, sikech agabe achsadra sheyesh la ptzimin. Interesting. Is this actually it feels like a brisa or something, but it says itmar, which is usually Amoraim. Interesting. Sikech agabe achsadra sheyesh la ptzimin kishera. So, so let's say you have this almost like a mavui kind of thing, right? You have like two walls opposite each other, and then you put schach on top of it. So you have two walls, but also at the end, at each end of each wall, there's like this, like a beam that's a tefach. So basically, you have two full walls, and then you have at the end of each wall, you have a tefach. Now, the halacha is that when it comes to a sukkah, all you need is two walls and a third wall that is one tefach. So this would be a kosher sukkah if you put schach on top. So sikech agabe achsadra sheyesh la ptzimin. So if you put schach on top of this achsadra, which we've been calling a portico, in this case it's like two walls and then there's like beams, like one tefach beams on each of the corners. So kshera. So that's a kosher sukkah. V'ilu hishva ptzimea psula. But if you kind of enclose these beams, then it's psula. Meaning, so we said that this construct is like two walls, and then at each corner, like at each end of each wall, there's like this thing that sticks out, a tefach, kilu, in the other direction. So let's say the walls are west and east. So then you would have a tefach on the north and south. So on the north and south walls, you'd have like one tefach coming in from each side. So if you would kind of Rashi actually explains it very nicely when he says that if you would take like a board and put it almost like sandwich these tefach beams in between the boards. So you have like the wall, then you have these tefach beams like at each end, and then you put up a board ki'ilu that is parallel to the wall, and these beams would be in between the two walls, essentially, right? Like this board, and then the beams in the middle, and then the wall. All right, I did the best I can. Anyways, so in that case, it's a puzzle sukkah. So what do we see? That by adding this wall, so then all of a sudden the sukkah becomes puzzle. So we see that adding a wall is being machmir, is being stringent. Abaye, so Abaye responds to Rav. He says, "Look, the didik shera." He says, first of all, according to me, it's not a puzzle sukkah; it's a kosher sukkah, because according to Abaye, you don't actually need any walls, because these porticos, they have like beams that go from vertical beam to vertical beam. Even if you have a portico that consists of like 4 vertical beams and then like some schach on top, so in between the vertical beams would actually be a horizontal beam that connects them, and therefore Abaye would say actually pitikr yored visosem, that these beams go down, and it's actually, we view it as if this portico is completely enclosed. So he says, look, first of all, according to me, I actually have no problem with when you add this wall to this portico thing. But ledidach siluk mechitzosi. But according to you, who say that it would be a puzzle sukkah, nonetheless, it's not really adding a wall. It's really siluk mechitzos. It is really wow, what's all that noise? Anyways, it's really just siluk mechitzos. It's like removing the original walls that were there, right? Adding, it's not really adding a wall as much as like overriding the existing walls that were there. Okay, I have a neighbor here who's a very ardent basketball player. He likes to play basketball at night, which sometimes interferes with my schedule. But I'll kopon him. We're gonna go weiter. So, Amalei Rabbi bar Rav Chanan le'Abai. So Rabbi bar Rav Chanan said to Abai, "V'lo matzinu mechitza le'Iser." What, we don't have an example where walls could create a stringency. V'atani, but we learn in a brayso. Bayis shechetzio mekora v'chetzio eina mekora. Wow, that sounds exciting. So let's say you have like let's just call it a house, and like half of it has a roof on it and half of it is just open to the sky. So gifanim kan. So if you have grapes planted under the roof, well then mutar lizora kan, you can put like wheat immediately on the other, on the non-roofed part. So like you have grapevines and wheat plants like right next to each other, and that's okay, because we'll say pitika yored v'sosem, and where the roof ends, like an imaginary wall just goes straight down to the ground, and if there's a wall, so then you can plant the grapes and the wheat right up to the wall. So v'ilu hishves keruyo aser, but if you would like complete the roof, well then it would be forbidden. So and I think we're treating the completion of the roof as though we're like adding onto a wall. So we see that in this case we're adding on to the wall, and that is now making it, you can no longer plant the grapevines right next to the wheat, because you would have to have, if there's no wall in between them, well then you would have to have 4 tefachim in between the grapes and the wheat. So here we're adding wall, and at the same time making it usher now to plant the wheat and the grapes right next to each other. So Amar Le, so Abai says to Rabbi bar Rav Chanan, Hasum siluk mechitzosu. There also, it's just removing a wall, right? We had an imaginary wall where we said pitikra yored v'sosim, that the roof would go straight down, and by completing the roof, you now remove that wall. So therefore, it's not exactly a situation of adding wall; it's more a situation of removing wall. Shalach le Rava la'Abaye biad Rav Shmaya bar Zeira. Rava sent to Abaye in the hands of Shmaya bar Zeira. V'lo matzinu mechitza le'iser. We don't have an example of a wall that when it's added, it makes things more stringent. V'atanya, but we learn in a brayso. Yesh b'mechitzos hakerem lehakel ulehachmir. That when it comes to the walls of a vineyard, you can be mekel and you can be machmir, right? There are certain chumas that are associated with the wall of a vineyard, and there are certain heters, kulas, that are associated with the walls of the vineyard. Keitzad, how is this? Kermanatua ad ikr mechitza. So if you have a vineyard that is planted mamish up to the wall of the vineyard, zoreh meikr mechitza ve'elach. Well, you could plant grains and greens. So, for example, wheat, you could plant mamish, right? You could plant it, push it on the other side of the wall. You could plant it. Now, if there was not a wall, then you wouldn't be able to plant the grapes right up to where you're planting the wheat. You would have to have 4 amas in between, 4 amas separation. But because there's a wall there, you can push it, plant the grapes and the wheat or whatever other zraim you're planting right up to the wall. V'zeu mechitzas akarem lahakel, and that is where we are being lenient when it comes to the walls of the vineyard. Ulahachmir keitzad, what is the example where we're being stringent when it comes to the walls of the vineyard? Hayamashuch min hakosel yud aleph ama, if the grapes were with 11 amis or less away from the wall of the vineyard, lo yavi zera lisham, well then you're unable to plant any zra'im between where the grapes end and the wall. As we're going to see soon, if there were 12 amis, I hope I wasn't saying tefachim, I meant amis, that if there are 12 amis between where the grapes end and the wall, well then you would be able to plant some zra'im over there. But if there are 11 amis or less, then you're unable to plant zra'im there. She'ilmali ein mechitza marchik daled amis v'zoreya. Now, if there was no wall over there, then all you would need is just to plant the zra'im 4 amis away from where the grapes end. However, because there is a wall, you need 11 amis of separation between the grapes and the wall, as we're going to see in a few minutes. V'zoi mechitzos akarem lahachmir, and this is the example where the walls of the vineyard are being stringent. So we see that having the wall there adds a stringency. So Amrle, so Abaye responds to Rav Shmaya bar Zeira, who was sent to him by Rava, and he says, "Uletaimech osva mimasnisin." No, if you think you're so great, if you think it's such a great question, then you should have asked me from a Mishnah. Why are you asking me from a Brisa? If you want to ask a kasha on me, ask a kasha from a Mishnah. A Mishnah is stronger than a Brisa. So I could show you a Mishnah that would ostensibly be asking the same question. And what's the Mishnah that you could have asked from? Ditnan, as we learn in a Mishnah, karachas hakerem. Chever, think back to the second daf of Masechta Ayruvin. It says karachas hakerem. That when you have a bald spot in a vineyard, right? Imagine you have a vineyard and it's square, and smack in the middle of the square, there is a square of empty land. And you want to plant wheat dartin. Beis Shammai says that you would have to have 24, right? That middle square with nothing planted dartin would have to have 24 amis by 24 amis empty. Basil says you'd only have to have 16 amis empty. Okay, let's go weiter. We're going to get it. We're going to explain it a little bit. Now, if you have a vineyard and it's all planted, there's no bald spots in the middle, but then there's there's some land around the karim between the wall and the grapes. Beis Shammai says that if you want to be able to plant wheat between where the grapes end and the wall, there would have to be 16 amis of land, of available land between the grapes and the wall. Beis Hillel says that if you want to plant wheat, you would just need to have 12 amis of land between the grapes and the wall. Now, we're going to explain a little bit. Ve'ezo hi karachas hakerem. What's the bald spot in the vineyard? Kerem shecharev emtzaiso. So if you have a vineyard, and in the middle of the vineyard there is a square of unplanted land. Im yesh sham tezayin ama. So if there are 16 amis by 16 amis in the middle, there's a square with nothing planted. So meaning if there's less than that, so then lo yavi zera l'sham, then you may not bring any like wheat or anything there to plant. Hayu sham tez zayin ama, but if there were 16 by 16 amis, no sein lo kedei avodaso, well then he gives the amount for its work. The amount of its work is 4 amis. Vizoreya es amosar, and then you could plant in the rest. So basically the idea is like this. So around the grapes, you need to give a area of 4 amis for a person to be able to plow with his ox. And that amount of space takes up 4 amis. So basically, if you have a square in the middle of the vineyard that is 16 amis by 16 amis, well then you could take 4 amas on all 4 sides, and that's going to be for the plowing, okay? And then what you're left with is a square 8 amas by 8 amas. And you could say, and that square 8 amas by 8 amas, in it you could plant wheat. Now, if it was any less than that, then it wouldn't work, because basically, let's say you have this square, right? This vineyard, it's a square, and you have the north part, the south part, the east part, and the west part. So now we have another square in the middle of just open land that isn't planted. So now that there is a square in the middle that we're planting wheat that is 8 amas by 8 amas, right? Because there's an empty square that's 16 amas by 16 amas, and then you know 4 amas. The first 4 amas of that square all around is where you're going to be plowing. But then you have an 8 amas by 8 amas patch in the middle where you can plant zraim, and therefore it's not going to be considered, part of the vineyard. But if it was any less than that, right? So let's say it was 7 by 7. Well, then we would, since they're like the north part of the vineyard would kind of eat into the 7 by 7 patch 3.5 amas, and therefore since it wouldn't be 4 amas, right? We would view, like, let's say the first 3.5 to be part of the northern part of this of the vineyard, and then the southern 3.5 amas would be like part of the southern part of the vineyard, and then since there's no 4, it would be like considered an annex of the northern part and an annex of the southern part and part of it, and then you're gonna have like kilei akarim, because you're going to have grapes and wheat planted together. So in order to not have an issue of kilei akarim, you need to make sure that this patch in the middle is 8 amas by 8 amas. That way, in the north of it, there's 4 amas of wheat, and the southern part has its own 4 amas of wheat, and they're completely separate. And there's also enough room for like 4 amas for the plow around it. So you need a minimum of 16 amas. Beis Shammai says you need 24 amas, because they add another 4 amas on each side, because the wheat would have to have its own 4 amas, and the grapes would have to have their own 4 amas. Fine. Seder. Now, machol akarim. What's the machol akarim? And this is really the part that's more significant for us. This like ring around the vineyard, right? So if you have a vineyard and it's square, and then there's like empty area around the vineyard, and then there's the wall around the vineyard. So, bein akarim legader, so we're talking about the land that's between the vineyard and the wall. She'im ein sham yud beis ama, that if there is less than 12 amas between the vineyard and the wall, lo yavi zera l'sham, well then you'll be unable to plant any wheat over there, or any zraim over there. Hayu sham yud beis ama, if there was 12 amas darin between the grapes and the wall, no sein lo kedei avodaso, well then you give 4 amas surrounding the grapes for plowing, vizorea es amosar, and then you could plant 4 amas worth, and then the remaining 4 amas close to the wall is not going to be planted, because if you plant it, then the dirt is going to get soft and the wall is going to fall down, so you end up leaving that part fallow. So basically, if you have 12 amas outside of the grapevines, well then it's enough to leave 4 amas for the plowing, 4 amas for the like zraim, and then another 4 amas that you're gonna just memela leave empty near the wall. So that is Abai's question, right? You can ask in that Mishnah that, well, now that there's a wall there, you have to leave 12 amas empty, whereas if there was no wall, you'd be able to plant the zraim after 4 amas. So, ella hasam lav hainu taima. Well, you can explain that the reason over there why you need 12 amas around the vineyard is the chodalid amas legabe kerem avodas hakerem. Well, because the 4 amas immediately surrounding the vineyard are in order to plow and work the vineyard. Legabe gader, the 4 amas that we're leaving empty by the fence, is kaven delo mizdaran afkurim afkalu. And since you can't really plant there, because then the wall might fall down, so it's hefker. The bene iika dalid chashivan v'ilo lo chashivan. And then the 4 amas in the middle, look, if there's 4 amas where you could plant zra'im, so then they'll be considered significant, and they won't be considered an annex to the grapevines. But if there's, right, and so therefore we need 4 amas in order for that to be considered a like patch on its own right. So basically the point is that it's not necessarily the wall that is being machmir, it's that the fact that there are practical implications that we need 4 amas to work the field, 4 amas to be considered a significant patch of land, another 4 amas that's just hefker, that you're not planting by the wall. So therefore it's not necessarily a question about, adding a wall and now it's more machmir. It's that there are other considerations, practical considerations about working the field. Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda, Gimel karpafs ze b'tzad ze. Okay, exciting sugya. So if you have 3 karpafs, one next to the other, Vishnayim achitzonim migupafim ve'emtzai enu migupaf. So now the 2 outer ones, you can kind of see like a drawing in Rashi. It's like an okay drawing, I guess. So the 2 outer ones are like, okay, if you imagine like our big chutzner and our little chutzner from our Mishnah, right? So you have the big chutzner, it's almost like a T. You have the big chutzner, and then you have the smaller chutzner intersecting it. So imagine you have that, but like the smaller chutzner, there's like 2 big chutzers and a smaller one in the middle. Alright, I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically in this case, so the middle one is nifritza b'mloa on both sides into these larger karpafs. So v'emtzai eno megupaf, so the middle one, it doesn't have these like kind of walls on the side. So v'yachid bazeh, and each one of the 3 karpafs has one person in it, right? So this is talking about where like you have people traveling and then they make like a makeshift kind of area for Shabbos. And now there are these 3 karpafs, and it's such that the middle karpaf is nifritza b'mloa l'makom ha'asur on both sides. So naisa kishayara. So in this case, just like as we said in the Mishnah, that the bigger chutzner kind of like extends into the smaller chutzner. So here also, the 2 outer karpafs are going to extend into the middle karpaf, and therefore all 3 of them are going to be considered to be together. And then v'nosn loyen, so naisik shayara, so they become like a shayara. If you remember from the first parak, right, that they all become, if there are 3 people together, so then there's no limit to how they'll be able to carry. There's no limit to how large it can be. V'nosn loyen kol tzarkan, they can use the entire karpaf for whatever they need it for. Emtzai megupaf, however, if the middle one had these like walls essentially, and the outer ones were nifratz b'mloa into the middle one, so then v'shnayim achitzonim einan megupafin, so v'yachid bazeh v'yachid bazeh v'yachid bazeh, and there's one person in each of the 3 karpafs. Well, in this case, we don't view it as though the 2 outer karpafs extend into the middle karpaf. Rather, we view it as though the middle one extends into the 2 outer ones, in which case you certainly do not have 3 people together. We have this one person who's like, unclear if he's in either one of the outer ones. So, ein nosn loyen ela beis sheish, well then, they only give them 6 beis sa'ah, meaning 2 beis sa'ah for each person, i.e. it just becomes a regular karpaf, it's not like a shayara. Now, ibayu aluhu, they want to know, now keeping the same setup, where you have like the 2 outer ones are nifratz b'mloa into the middle one, so, echad bazeh v'echad bazeh v'shnayim be'emtzai ma'u. What if the 2 outer karpafs had one person in each, and the middle one had 2 fellows? So, ilahacha nafke tlasa havu. So, if we view it as though the 2 in the middle kind of extend into the to one of the outer ones, so then there'll be 3 in that one. And we say, well, if we treat it also as if it's in the other outer ones, then there'll be 3 of them over there. Or maybe we'll say that no, the 2 middle guys split up, in which case each of the outer chutzes only has 2 fellows, not 3. And if you're going to say that we split up the 2 guys in the middle, one goes to this side, the other one goes to that side, so what if you have 2 fellows on the outer, in each of the two outer karpafs, and you have one fellow in the middle one. Ma'u, what do we do? So in this case, certainly, if this middle guy goes to either one of the outer karpafs, that one will have three people, or Dilma, or perhaps maybe we're saying, yeah, but we don't know which side he's going to go to. So therefore, maybe none of them are considered to have three. So vilchsa ba'ayan lekula. The halacha is that our question is mekel, is lenient. I.e., we could be lenient over here and say that we could treat it like a shayara and say that they can carry as much as they need to. Rav Chizda. So Rav Chizda says, Gidur chamisha umechitza chamisha ein mitztarfin ad sheyeh okulo begidud okulo b'mechitza. Let's read that again. Gidur chamisha umechitza chamisha. So let's say you have two chutzers, okay? So there's two chutzers. Now in between the two chutzers, there, like, one chutzer is elevated from above the other one, meaning you have one chutzer and then 5 tefachim above, higher up, raised up than the first chutzer is a second chutzer. And then there's also 5 tefachim of additional wall in that second chutzer. So basically, from the perspective of the lower chutzer, there's 10 tefachim of wall. From the perspective of the higher chutzer, there's only 5 tefachim of wall. So ein mitztarfin, the platform and the wall do not join together. You need to have it either entirely be platform or entirely be wall. Meisvei, we have a kasha. So if you have two chatzeres, one is higher up than the other one, and the higher one is 10 tefachim taller, is 10 tefachim elevated from the lower one. So, or sheyesh ba gidud chamisha mechitza chamisha, or the platform is 5 tefachim and the wall that extends past it, above the platform another 5 tefachim. So for a total of 10 tefachim, guess what? Me'arvin shnayim ve'in me'arvin echad. Well, then they make two separate Ayruvs. They cannot join together in one Ayruv because from the perspective of the lower one, it's a proper wall. Pachis mikan, but if the total height of the wall was less than 10 tefachim, ma'arvin echad ve'im ma'arvin shnayim, well then they would make one Ayruv, not two Ayruvs. No, so it's a kasha on Rav Chizda, because Rav Chizda said that the platform and the wall are not mitztarif. But over here we seem to be saying that if you have this platform, which is 5 tefachim, and the wall is another 5 tefachim, they could draw, then it creates a wall, and they would have to make two separate Eruvs. So Amar Rava, so says Rava, Moder Rav Chizda batachtona, that Rav Chizda admits that, Rav Chizda agrees that, from the perspective of the lower chotzer, this 5 tefach platform plus 5 tefach wall would be considered a wall, and they would have to make their own eruv. Since it sees a wall of 10 tefachim. If that's the case, well then tachtona ta'ariv shnaim v'lo ta'ariv echad. Well, okay, if that's the case, well then the lower chotzer should have to make its own Eruv because it's got a wall separating it from the upper one. Elyona, the top Chatzar, lo ta'ariv lo echav lo shnaim, shouldn't be able to make any Eruv bichlal, because on the one hand it can't make its own Eruv because it's nifrit sabimloa to the lower one, right? Because there's no proper from the upper Chatzar only has a wall 5 tefachim. So it can't make its own Eruv because it's nifrit sabimloa to the other Chatzar, but at the same time it can't join together with the other Eruv because with the other Chatzar, because the other Chatzar has a wall that's 10 tefachim, and therefore it would be unable to join together with the second Chatzar. And therefore, how could the Brisa say that in this case they make two separate Eruvs if really the lower Chatzar makes its own Eruv, but the upper Chatzar would be unable to make any kind of Eruv? So Amar Bar Ula kigon traisa elyona migupefes ad eser ames. So this is Rabbi Bar Ula that it's talking about where the upper Chatzar actually had like walls coming in from the sides, and as long and the sort of opening in the wall was less than 10 amas. And therefore it's considered like there was a proper wall, and that is why they make, each chutzner makes their own Eruvs, because the lower chutzner has this wall that's 10 tefachim tall, and therefore they make their own separate Eruv. And the upper chutzner makes this one separate Eruv because it's got this fourth wall, essentially, and therefore it's not nifritz of loa to the lower one, it's just got a regular Pesach darten. So ihachi, if that's the case, well then ema seifa. If we go weiter in that brisa, what do we say? Pachis mikan, that if this like platform plus wall contraption was less than 10 tefachim, ma'arvin echad ve'em ma'arvin shnayim. Well, they have to make one Eruv. They cannot make two separate Eruvs. But if what we're saying is correct, well then ibaya chad te'arev, ibaya trei te'arev. But if what we're saying is correct, that basically there's a wall between these two chutzers with a Pesach in it, well then why do we say that if it's less than 10 tefachim, right, that if this platform plus wall is less than 10 tefachim, well then they have to make one Eruv? Why? They should be able to make one Eruv if they want to, but they could also make separate Eruvs because there's a wall between them with a Pesach. So Rabba Bred de Rava, so this is Rabba the son of Rava, Kigon Shenifritza Tachtona Bimloa Le'Elyona. Well, it's because it's talking about where the lower chutzner is completely breached into the upper chutzner, and that is why they make one Eruv together. But if that's the case, Tachtona Chad Te'arev Chelo Te'arev. Well, if this is the case, well then, yeah, certainly the lower chutzner, which is nifritzav loa into the upper chutzner, would have to make one Eruv together with the upper chutzner, can't make two separate Eruvs. But Elyona, ibaya trei ta'arev, ibaya chad ta'arev. If the upper one wants, they should be able to join together with the lower chutzner, but if they want, they can make their own Eruv. So, enochinami, the Gemara says, yeah, you're right. That's 100% correct. The lower one would have to make a, one can only join together with the upper chutzner, but the upper chutzner can either join together with the lower one or make their own. That's correct. But v'chikatani pachis mikan ma'arvin echad ve'ma'arvin shnayim matachtona. That when the brisa says that if this platform plus wall is less than 10 tefachim, so then they have to make one Eruv. It's talking about from the perspective of the lower chutzner, but the upper chutzner, sure, if they want to, they can make their own separate Eruv. Darash Mereimar taught Gidud Chamisha Mchitza Chamisha Mitzdarfin, that unlike Rav Chizda, Mereimar says that if you have 5 tefachim of platform and 5 tefachim of wall, they can be mitzdarf, they can join together to form 10 tefachim. Ashkechei Ravina le Rav Acha B'Rei Rava. Ravina found Rav Acha B'Rei Rava. Amrle, and he said to him, Tani Mar Midi B'Mchitza, did you learn anything about walls? Amrle lo, he said no. V'ilchsa Gidud Chamisha Mchitza Chamisha Mitzdarf. And the halacha is that if you have 5 tefachim of platform and 5 tefachim of wall, they would join together. Okay, let's move on. Rav Hoshaya asks a kasha. During Abayin b'Shabbos ma'u sheye'esru. If you have dwellers who show up on Shabbos, do they make things out? So what does that mean? Imagine you have 2 chutzers and they're separated by a wall, and each one made their own Eruv. Great. The wall now falls down on Shabbos. Well, now things just change. Now you have 2 chutzers that are merged, that are basically open into one another. They would have to join together in an Eruv, but they didn't, because when Shabbos started, there was a wall over there. So Amr Rav Chizda, says Rav Chizda, Tashma kaminir chutzah gedola shnifta lektana, that when we have, like our case, that you have the small chutzah that's completely breached into the larger chutzah, hagdol mutaris v'aktana asura, the larger one is permitted and the smaller one is forbidden, because the smaller one is like the entrance to the gedola. So what do we see? So we see that even though the breach happened on Shabbos, right? Rav Chizda wants to assume that when our Mishnah says that chutzah gedola shenifritza lektana, that means that the wall fell down on Shabbos, and we're saying that now the smaller chutzah is not able to carry. Meaning, when Shabbos started, you had 2 separate chutzahs with a wall in between, and now on Shabbos the wall fell down, and now the smaller chutzah is no longer able to carry. So we see that this new sort of living condition that happens on Shabbos, would make it forbidden to carry. So Amar Rabba said, Amar mi ba'od yom nifritza. Yeah, no, I'll say that the Mishnah, when it says nifritz, the big chutzner and the small chutzner and the wall fell down, I'll say it fell down before Shabbos already. But if it fell down on Shabbos, the small chutzner would continue to be able to carry. Amar Abaye says to Rabba, lo teima mar amar. Don't say, I'll say that it makes sense to me to say that the wall fell down before Shabbos. Ella, rather, vada mi ba'od yom nifritza. Not that I'll say that it fell down, that the wall fell down before Shabbos. I'll say certainly the wall fell down before Shabbos. To Amaru, because Master, you, Rabbah, are the one, the Amar, who said, Ba'oi minei merav Huna, va'oi minei merav Yehuda. I asked from my Rebbe Rav Huna, I asked from my Rebbe Rav Yehuda, Erev derech HaPesach, v'nistam HaPesach, if a fellow made an Eruv, meaning you have two chutzers and they joined together in an Eruv based on the fact that there was a Pesach in between them. Eruv derech chalom v'nistam chalom. If they made a Eruv by way of a window and then the window got sealed up, what happens? Meaning when they had made an Eruv because there was a Pesach or because there was a chalon, and then on Shabbos the Pesach or the chalon gets sealed up. So do we say that the Eruv just went out the window? So ve'amru li, and they said to me, Rabbah said that Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda said to me, Shabbos came shehutra, that once Shabbos was mutter, it's mutter. Meaning, if when Shabbos began, there was a Pesach between the two chutzers, or a Chalom between the two chutzers, and they made an Eruv together, and therefore they joined together for Shabbos, well then, even if the doorway or the window gets closed up somehow over the course of Shabbos, well, it was already mutter when Shabbos started, so it remains mutter, and they could pass things over the wall, or whatever it might be, from one chutzner to the other. Chever, that was Daf Tzadi Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin. The Mishnah, the Gemara began talking about walls adding stringencies, and they kept on asking kashas on Abaye to try to prove that a wall can add a stringency, and Abaye kept on deflecting the kashas. We're talking about 3 karpafs that are next to each other. So we say, depending on which one is breached into the other, maybe we can treat it like a caravan, maybe we can't. A 5 tefach platform plus a 5 tefach wall. So Rav Chisda said that they could join together to create a 10 that they do not join together to create a 10 tefach wall. Although we saw in the Gemara that maybe in some cases he would say that they can join together. Meremer says that in general they are mitzdarif. And then we talked about a chotzer that, gets new residents on Shabbos, and we say that hol v'hutra that, if things were permitted when Shabbos began, even if, let's say, the walls fall down, it doesn't matter. They can continue to carry. Chevra, peace.